Thanks to her cameo in the Bible and the many movie and TV adaptations of her story, the Queen of Sheba is one of the most famous and mysterious women of the ancient world. But there's a lot more to her than her relationship with King Solomon. Here's the true story of the Queen of Sheba. If we're going to talk about the Queen of Sheba, then we've got to ask a pretty obvious question. Where exactly is Sheba? Well, one theory, illustrated by the BBC, posits that Sheba refers to the Sabaean kingdom in what is now Yemen. So, if the queen were heading over to Israel to meet King Solomon, that would make for a really long trek through modern-day Saudi Arabia. Of course, that trip wouldn't be impossible for a determined queen with access to a lot of camels. However, the country that claims the Queen of Sheba most strongly is Ethiopia. Yes, it's a little further from Israel than Yemen. It's also landlocked thanks to the present-day country of Somalia. But Christian Science Monitor confirms that Ethiopia had a lot of interaction with Israel and its neighboring nations back in the day as a country that served as a gateway to the Middle East. Need proof? Well, present-day Ethiopians' DNA is 40 to 50% based outside of Africa. Languages that originated in the Middle East are spoken in Ethiopia, and the two regions even share farming techniques and crops. There's a lot of weirdness around King Solomon and the Queen, but one thing that would make total sense is the political intrigue around the Queen of Sheba's land. After all, folks were constantly going to war over territory, and King Solomon may have been wise, but even he might have fallen for all that potential gold and incense. According to Jewish Encyclopedia, Jewish legends describe the land of Sheba as incredibly rich in both population and wealth. On top of that, the dust of the country was said to be more valuable than gold. So, as the story goes, King Solomon commanded the Queen of Sheba to come see him under threat of invasion. She responded by saying that not only would she come, but she would show up in 3 years instead of the normal 7 it would take for her to travel to Jerusalem. Thus began the one-upmanship turned seduction between the two of them. So, King Solomon is suddenly visited by this beautiful and tremendously rich queen from a foreign land. Given that Solomon famously had 700 wives and 300 concubines, it's not a stretch to think that he quickly developed amorous designs on the Queen of Sheba. There's no way to know for sure, but the Ethiopian people believe their first emperor, Menelik I, was indeed the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Translations of ancient writings maintain that King Solomon laid his best moves upon the queen, and they got together. But according to some tales, it's a little more complicated than that, as one legend suggests he had to trick her into his bed. Not exactly the most romantic way to have a child together. So let's assume that the Queen of Sheba hailed from modern-day Ethiopia. If that's the case, then there's a good chance that her ancient palace lies in an area known as the Tigray region. This section of Ethiopia contains over 100 ancient churches, most of which are still used and all of which are carved into white rocks. Visitors can spy the remnants of an ancient city, including a 1,600-foot-tall white obelisk that's considered the tallest stone ever erected by humans. According to National Geographic, the site also includes underground royal catacombs and a giant gold mine that might have been the source of all those gifts to Solomon. But here's where we come to the complicated part. It's not 100% confirmed that the Queen of Sheba lived in Ethiopia. Some monuments associated with her are 1,000 years off base from when she would have lived. But archaeological digs have confirmed royal seals were found in Axum, which used to be the capital of the Aksumite Empire. And as of 2018, the region was only 10% excavated. In other words, more proof of the Queen's life in Africa may yet emerge. Some people don't think she was from Ethiopia at all, though, but rather Nigeria. Under this theory, the tomb of the Queen of Sheba is widely believed to be outside of a village called Okiri. Thousands of people come every year to honor and pay respects to the Queen. The grave itself is super impressive, surrounded by ruins and ancient buildings, because of course the Queen would be buried within her impressive kingdom. Well, assuming it's where she's actually buried anyway. Other legends say the ruins are a monument to another rich woman from antiquity named Bilikisa Sungbo, who lived much later than the Queen of Sheba. Scientists are still studying the ruins to determine the truth, but so far it remains a mystery. Anyone who's studied ancient civilizations will tell you that spices were an easy way to know how cool your kingdom was.
He who controls the spice controls the universe.
If you had the flavors and crops people wanted, selling them was an easy way to get rich. The Bible confirms that the Queen of Sheba gave Solomon lots of gold and precious stones in addition to loads of spices. It goes on to say, "There had never been such spices as those the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon." Spices were sometimes given as tributes to kings, so this was a flattering move and a one-up challenge to Solomon at the same time. It's also consistent with other accounts of people from Sheba in the Bible who similarly came with loads of spices to trade. So what spices did the Queen show up with? The Bible doesn't go into detail, however, we can make a pretty educated guess. A fact sheet put out by the Netherlands African Business Council listed turmeric, ginger, and korarima as spices grown in the country. And it's safe to assume that King Solomon had probably tasted nothing like what the queen sprinkled on his food. The Queen of Sheba is surrounded by bizarre stories and strange legends, but one of the weirdest is so mystical that it's probably not based in any truth at all. Or, at the very worst, perhaps King Solomon gave rise to this particular tale because he was grossed out by body hair on a woman. The story starts with King Solomon hearing rumors that the Queen of Sheba had hairy legs and the feet of a goat. He heard it from a genie in his court. Seriously. Well, more accurately, it was a jinn. The jinn was worried that King Solomon would want to marry this gorgeous queen, but instead of disgust, the king was fascinated. He ordered a glass floor to be built in order to trick the queen into thinking it was water. And then, when she lifted up her skirt to walk over the water, her hairy legs were revealed. Kinda pervy. The cause for the goat's foot was that her mother supposedly craved goat meat when she was pregnant with the queen. PBS tells one version of the story where the queen's hoof transforms into a normal foot. But there's another version where King Solomon saw she had hairy legs and ordered the jinn to fetch her a hair removal cream. After all, there was no way he was going to let one of the most powerful women in history get away, hairy legs or not. All of this diplomacy and one-upmanship between King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba doesn't mean they had a lot in common. If she was from Ethiopia, she was from a completely different continent and was exposed to completely different cultural forces than what King Solomon was pushing on a daily basis. Even if she came from Yemen, that was practically a different corner of the world in that day and age. And when it came to religion, the two had very different viewpoints about what deity was calling the shots. In some tellings of the story, the Queen of Sheba ruled over a kingdom that worshipped the sun. King Solomon sent her a letter asking if she and her followers could pretty please start worshiping the Jewish god instead. The queen sent King Solomon gifts in response. When he didn't respond to the gifts, she made the epic trek over to his palace. From there, the story largely runs close to what's in the Bible, but there's one important addition. After listening to the wisdom of King Solomon and being amazed at his giant pimped-out palace, the queen eventually converted to Judaism. Today, there's a huge Jewish heritage in Ethiopia and surrounding areas by way of the Beta Israel religious group. So King Solomon working to impress a way out of his league queen may have spawned an entire religious culture. Josephus was one of the great historians of the ancient world, and according to him, the Queen of Sheba brought a mysterious plant called balsam to the Holy Land. What's so mysterious about this particular type of flora? Well, we're not exactly sure what Josephus meant. At the moment, the best guess is that he was talking about the bright tropical flower in the genus Impatiens. The Old Farmer's Almanac describes the plant as desiring shade and water. That would have guaranteed it as a status symbol for people living in the hot, dry regions of the African continent. And the fact that it attracts birds and has seed pods that simultaneously burst would have made it absolutely freakish to King Solomon. But there are potentially different definitions for balsam that shouldn't be ignored. It can also refer to fragrant perfume or a resin that's extracted from plants, so it's possible that the queen blew Solomon's mind with an otherworldly scent. We don't hear much about Ethiopia in the Bible, but the queen and her son ensured that the country would forever have a place in modern biblical scholarship. The story goes that Menelik made a journey to Jerusalem to see his dad. Once he showed up, he was welcomed with open arms. In fact, King Solomon loved his newly found son so much that he asked Menelik to stay and rule the land after he passed away. Menelik refused and said he would return home, but he went above and beyond, leaving in the middle of the night with the freaking Ark of the Covenant. Was this revenge because what his birth dad did to his mom? We'll never know, but it's a definite power move to take the Ark out of a Jewish holy city and into the rainforest. Granted, a lot of this is myth and legend, but to this day, Ethiopian priests protect what they believe to be the Ark in Axum, Ethiopia. It's protected under the watch of monks that may or may not be trained to kill with their bare hands. Why weren't these guys in the cast of Raiders of the Lost Ark? The country of Ethiopia accepts the Queen of Sheba as the queen mother of their people. Why wouldn't you, right? Her son brought the Ark of the Covenant to Ethiopia, and she had that very kid with a king blessed by God. That's true icon status, and it's led to some people considering Ethiopians to be the chosen people of God. In fact, the descendants of the queen have official divine right to rule in Ethiopia, a rule that was officially inscribed into the Ethiopian constitution in 1955. And back in the 19th century, she played an important role in a political power struggle. See, a lot of what we know about the Queen of Sheba comes from an Ethiopian holy book called the Kebra Nagast, and evidently whoever wields this thing has a whole lot of power. In 1872, King Johannes IV of Ethiopia begged Queen Victoria in a letter. There is a book called Kebra Nagast which contains the law of the whole of Ethiopia. I pray you will find out who has got this book and send it to me, for in my country my people will not obey my orders without it. Thankfully, Victoria returned the book from England. King Johannes no doubt thought that having the inscription of formal Ethiopian law would win him favor over his rivals. And it just goes to show how much power the Queen of Sheba has had for years upon years, where even a book with her name in it can make or break a king. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite historical figures are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.